Okay. All right. Well, we'll get started. It's just a little after 7. It's 7:03. Good evening, everyone. It looks like we have about 42 people on our call. So thank you, everyone, for joining. This is the Seaholm PTA meeting for the month of October. And I'm Julia Cooney, the president of the Seaholm PTA, and want to give a welcome to my other fellow PTA board members. Obviously, Kyle Hall, our principal. I'm going to miss somebody, but I know we have Jenny Beckman and Leslie Voigt, and we have Amy Hockmer, and we have Shannon Hurwitz, and I think we have a couple more people. I think I see Sue Wright on the call, and I hope I haven't missed anybody else, but thank you all for being on. The meeting is being recorded, so hopefully that's not an issue for anyone. We're going to take about 10-15 minutes at the front end to do just some regular Seaholm PTA and school business. And then we're going to move in just about 10-15 minutes, and then we're going to move into our guest speakers. And I'm delighted to say we have 3 guest speakers with us tonight on a very important topic, which is mental health and suicide prevention. So thank you to Gigi, Nicole, and Cherie for being with us. And we did invite Groves, Berkshire, BCS, and Derby parents and teachers to join our call. So welcome to any of our guests who have joined us tonight. We felt this was an important topic for both our high school and middle school parents and teachers, for our students. So thank you all for being with us. So just a little bit of PTA Seaholm business. First of all, we have our Spirit Wear campaign going on. Even though our students are not in school, there's always a good way to help them get their Seaholm spirit. So thank you to Bloomfield Sport and Jill from Bloomfield Sport. So out on our PTA website, you can see we've got some great swag. And thank you, Stephanie Sawich, for your work on that. So you can get out there. Holiday gifts are always a good idea, or just make our kids feel happy when they're having a down day with a little Seaholm swag. The money that goes from that as a fundraiser goes to our teacher grants, and so wanted to do a shout out on our teacher grants. Thank you, Jenny Beckman, and really wanted to thank our parents for their donations, both to Seaholm PTA membership as well as direct donation. We had about 210 parents become members of our PTA, and about 144 parents give direct donations. And so thank you. We're delighted. There's always an opportunity to go out and if you haven't become a member or done direct donation, had a little bit of a hiccup with eFunds this year, so you can go back out and make a donation if you'd like to. But on the teacher grants, we had a meeting earlier last week, and we're delighted to have given out 10 teacher grants to teachers who asked for a series of things, from the math department to the science department, always robotics, engineering, special education, ALS. So we're delighted to be able to support across 10 or 12 projects, requests from teachers, and there's always requests from the administration and possibly our students. So love to be able to support all the wonderful programs that we have at the school, and that's where your donations go, is to our teachers, to the faculty, and to the administration on the programs that we do for the school. So thank you, everybody, for those donations. Wanted to just make a shout out on the Reflections Art Program. If you have students, children who are into the arts, the program, you can find information on the PTA website, actually on the Seaholm website under activities. And this is the Art Reflections program. You need to get your submissions in, your students do, get their submissions in by November I'm going to get the date wrong on this one. I think it's November the 20th. It's a Friday. Really encourage everyone. This really celebrates our students' talents, whether it's in the arts, it's music, could be film, could be dance, choreography, photography, all normal things in the arts. So please encourage you all to have your students. Diana Patterson, who's a parent of a senior, is the person who's running that program. So give her a shout out if you like. And then if you shop at Kroger, which I do and many of you may do, we now have an opportunity through your Kroger Rewards card to have your money, a portion of money goes through, it's called a Community Awards that Kroger's does, and some of that money will come back to Seaholm. And so we'll be putting some information out on the PTA site and probably in the e-news about how you can sign up. And when you shop at Kroger's, there's a portion of your spend that will come back to the school, which is a wonderful thing that Kroger's does for our community. And they give about $2 million out to the local Southeastern Michigan community, which is not a small amount. So we'll get you information on that. And then open house. Just to give a shout out, there is an open house if you know any parents or rising 7th and 8th graders who are interested in coming to our Seaholm community for high school. There'll be an open house, a virtual open house, next Monday on the 26th, and there's information that you can find out on our website. And we'll also post something out on the PTA Facebook page. So for those of you who don't know, we have a PTA Facebook page. So that's just the quick update. I kept that into about 5 minutes, so a little faster than intended, but wanted just to make sure everybody kind of get a heads up on what we have going on right now within the PTA. So the program tonight, and I'm really wanted to give a really important topic tonight on mental health and suicide prevention. And so we'll have about a 50-minute presentation. And then we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes for questions that any of you may have. So many of us either personally have experienced or have known family, loved ones, neighbors who have struggled with mental health illness, and suicide. And whether it's in the past or whether it's something that may present in the future, I think we all know how important this topic is. And so for those who do suffer, I'd ask that we take just a few moments of silence to think of those who struggle with this topic. So thank you very much. I'd like to welcome our guest speakers tonight. We have, again, our topic tonight is Talk of a Lifetime, discussing mental health and suicide with our kids. And it's not an easy topic to have, an easy discussion to have with our children. So we'll take about 15 minutes, as I said. Want to welcome Gigi Colombini. Gigi is a psychotherapist who focuses in suicide prevention. She's a specialist in suicide prevention. She will give us a presentation. And then we also have two of our counselors from Seaholm. Delighted to have Nicole Festine and Cherie Wilson with us. They're both counselors at school and very deep. They both have their masters and their license as licensed counselors, as does Gigi. You can find information and background and their bios on all of those individuals out on our website, but wanted to really give a thank you to all three of them for being with us tonight on this really important topic. And I encourage you, Seaholm has a number of programs with which Nicole and Cherie will talk about. I know that Groves does as well, and your middle school programs maybe do. If you don't have the access, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the three here after our program tonight, if you'd like to connect with anyone. And I know that Cherie and Nicole will talk a bit specifically about the program we have at Seaholm, but Gigi is going to give us a presentation, which we're really looking forward to. So thank you all very much for being here tonight.
Hi there.
Yeah,
okay.
Turn it over to you.
Let me see if I can do this.
Okay.
Sure thing. Okay.
Oh, perfect.
It's working, except that thing in the middle, but okay. You're not seeing the thing in the middle, hopefully. So I want to start by saying, for those of us who've been touched by suicide in any way, that sometimes when I'm giving these types of communications, it's not intended to be, so we're going to look at it as, like 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I started doing suicide prevention work. I knew stuff then, and I every year learn more and more stuff. As we know more, then we do more in prevention efforts or treatment or whatever. So it's not intended to look at, if it's touched you personally, to look at life and say, I should have done this, I should have done that. So just if that's something that's going on in your head, try to set that aside and know that we all do the best we can in the moments with the information we have, and I'm hoping to share more information. Okay. So, so what is going on with our kids? Let me get this bar out of the middle of my screen if I can. There we go. So I'm not staring at it. So, let's start with the reality that teen years are so confusing for everyone. I think particularly parents. It's confusing for the kids, but they don't know there's anything other than their normal. So we look at them and try to assess what's going on. Is it a problem, or is it the normal angst that teens experience in order to become themselves, right? So that's a reality, and that's a lot of parents get really frustrated and confused by that, or feel like they had no idea because they just presumed this is how it is. So that's normal. Then we're going to look at the reality, the prevalence of mental health disorders with young people. We're going to look at suicide. I'm going to do just a tiny bit on how schools can help and the importance of that. And then some brief little interventions that I have longer explanations on my website about them, but it's good to families to know that there's something that you can do when you're concerned about your kid or kids in crisis. Okay. Okay. So what's going on with our kids? Really, it's the F word, but it's the other F word though. It's the feelings F word, not that one. If we think about it like this, if we can recall, for those of us most of us on this call are parents, unless you're staff and you're not a parent, but you've probably been around a small person, a small human, that when we come to the planet, we come fully emotionally expressed. In fact, all of the feelings or all of the communication we have is communicated through feelings, through emotional expression. Most of it's crying, but one cry is hungry, one cries maybe I need a diaper change, one cry is I'm bored, one cries I'm hurting, tired, all of this communication to meet the small human's needs. In fact, it's normal, natural human stuff to be expressing our feelings openly, including the laugh that there's all the viral videos on, right? We hear some other kid laughing in the store, a 6-month-old or a year-old, that great belly laugh. It bonds us to the small human. It creates great, stuff in the brain. Normal, natural human stuff. And we reach the ripe old age of something like, 3, maybe 4, when language is pretty adept and there's a clear expectation that we use our words and not our feelings to communicate our needs, which makes sense because, of course, words are more clear. But our cultural mantra shifts it from this is so normal to suck it up and deal with it. There's not a whole lot in between, and there's not a lot of training in between for people about the reality that we're still feeling everything, but we're really trying to either be, the communications we get of like showing up to 3-year-old preschool or kindergarten, and we're being brave because we don't want to be a crybaby and cry, or our best friend doesn't pick us on the playground for something in 3rd grade, and we can't show how mad or how upset we are because of things. Definite communication about how brave somebody's being because they're not about some upset or outwardly upset about something that maybe they should be. Feelings are normal, natural human stuff, but we definitely get lots of communication about how we're not supposed to show it. And there's even gender rules about these things, right? So, us girls, maybe we can be a little bit emotional. Maybe it's hormones that time of the month or whatever. We can be sad, right? Boys are not allowed to be sad. It's inappropriate. They get labeled with all kinds of awful things. I don't know if you guys remember a couple of years ago, Serena Williams got really mad on the tennis courts. It made headlines. Like, there's a woman mad out there publicly. She's expected to apologize, but yet McEnroe is famous for his upsets on the tennis courts, throwing things and having anger outbursts. That was okay. Women are not allowed to be mad. Boys will be boys. They can be a little bit mad. And if any of us are too happy, we're either crazy or high. So nobody really wants to be playing this game, but we're all, to some degree, trying to figure out how to be ourselves. We're still human, but we're expected to handle things in the right way, to not be too emotional, to get through grief things really quickly. all those kinds of things. So this is like the world we live in. And we've been practicing this as adults for a bit longer. For youth, sometimes it can be really painful to not be themselves, which I think is a good thing because most of us want our kids just to be themselves. But there's all of these rules that we've been following that sometimes we think are really good to follow and protect our kids from being teased or successful or whatever it is, right? So the F word has a lot of implications in terms of what's going on and how we're communicating, okay? There's feelings everywhere, but most of the time we're doing our best to not show them. So then we look at disorders that are out there in terms of the prevalence of them with youth. So all of these feelings that aren't being expressed or are desperately trying to figure out how to be, right? Because, for instance, anxiety is a whole lot of worrying that goes on to become, it impairs our ability to function normally at some level. That's how we get to diagnose it, right? If somebody's worrying so much or having to do something to reduce the worry because I can't sleep, I can't focus, maybe I'm not eating, maybe I'm eating too much, maybe I'm sleeping, like it's so much worry that it's made life, normal life, not normal. And depression is the sadness version of that, right? It's feeling sad so much because sad is normal. We're human still, we're people. But when we feel sad to the extent that we can't function normally, then it can be diagnosable. And this is some of the diagnoses. And what we, of course, know is that lots of people have these things going on and they're not actually diagnosed. And then, of course, we know the diagnoses cross over so much because anxiety can clearly look like ADD or ADHD because I'm so worried all the time about whatever's going on over here that I can't focus over here. I can't sit still. So all of these cross. But the reality is it's something like, I think 1 in 15 kids, I think is how it translates, has anxiety. Maybe 1 in 18 with depression. It's a lot. It's happening a lot. All the numbers, everything I'm going over, this is all pre-COVID. It has ramped up so much. There's so many unknowns for all of us, right? And then the kids that don't have the amount of life experience that we have, knowing that there have been really bad times that, most of us have gotten through. And we know that somehow we're going to get through this, even though we've not seen anything like this, but we're pretty confident that we're going to get through it. For a kid who's never seen anything like it, and are maybe seeing their parents so distressed and worried about, how are they going to keep the business afloat, or all the different things that us as adults are encompassing other than trying to teach our kids at home things like algebra, which doesn't make sense at all to me, and different things like that. So the stressors are everywhere, and the kids are watching us. They're feeling their own feelings. They may be hearing things on the news and they don't really understand it, and none of us really even know what to believe or understand about things because we get so much information that's seemingly contradictory. All of this increases all of these significantly. But if we can normalize that for people, if we can say what you're feeling is actually completely appropriate, you're responding appropriately to some situation that you've never had. You've never felt like this before. You've never been through this before. It can really help to ease somebody that they're not actually going crazy, but they're responding appropriately to a life situation that they've never encountered before. None of us have. And then you add all the rest of the usual life situations that are really hard too, which is, all the other diseases, losses of loved ones, changes in life. I mean, life still presents with stuff. And then you throw this big thing on top of it, and our kids are really, really trying to understand. The more we can normalize it, the better they'll be. Again, some of these numbers, 1 in 6 children aged 2 to 8. 2 to 8. Like, the numbers in the last while have gone up so much. We're seeing these types of numbers increase. It's just a different world than it used to be. And if we can acknowledge that our kid might need help and that we're okay with that because there's things going on, the better off everybody will be. So again, looking at the scope of things. Sometimes for some people, I put these up. I'm not a huge data geek. My partner is, and my partner in crime in this work is, and she loves this kind of stuff. And I know that there's some people who like to see the numbers, like how much is this really going on? So I present it. This is what it looks like. It is a significant problem. And it's a problem because, so I want to be clear, this is in my observation doing this type of work for 30 years, things happen in life that impact us. We are doing our best to be the mature, brave, I don't know, all the things that we're doing the best to be, right? We actually have an emotional response to them. And when we desperately try to not express that, or it becomes so big that we are not, we begin to have the things that can be diagnosed in an outpatient setting. It looks like people are coming in and out of the waiting room. I hope everybody's okay. Some people that were in are being readmitted. Hopefully we're staying with it. So trauma is a factor that I think that we all need to look at, and trauma looks so different to different people. But I like to think of it when I'm talking with parents. So there's the story, the idea of that the euphemism that, in life we should, if we're filling our jar of rocks, right, we should put the big rocks in first, the things that are really important to us in first. That should go in first so that if we're aligning with our values, we are putting those in first, and then we add the mediums and the smalls. And that way our life or our days don't get filled up with things that are not as important to us, right? Priorities. When I'm looking at trauma and helping someone through a difficult time, through an emotional crisis, I'm going to look at trauma first, because to me, that's like removing those big rocks out. So the big rocks get put into somebody's emotional inner world. And if we're just working on the smaller stuff and the bigger rocks are still taking up so much emotional space, it's not leaving room for the rest of the regular stuff that happens in life, like college apps and blowing an exam and a breakup of a relationship and all the other things. But because trauma can look different to different people, it doesn't have to be a big thing, and it certainly can be some of the big things that are on the list. We need to be viewing our kids, and as us professionals, those that we work with, like, as what has affected them, like what seemed to be something that impacted them a lot. Sometimes we can see, like, our kid that was really devastated by not doing as well as they absolutely knew they could do on something they're passionate about, whether it's like a sports thing or a creative arts thing or whatever. And how much is that taking up their emotional space, so that, boy, a couple of things happen that are small at home or at school, and it's just like, boom. So we need to be considering these things when we're looking. This is normal. This is like the feeling, the humanness is still a part of who we are, and trying to separate it out, or worse, trying to make somebody wrong for feeling their feelings, can make things much more difficult. So another analogy I use is an emotional balloon. So we learn early about not showing our feelings, but they go somewhere, right? So one of the examples out there is this emotional balloon where we just sort of keep blowing the things that we're not expressing out there because we're mature and we got it together and look how brave they are and blah, 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 those positive messages for how we're handling stress without feelings so well. So they sort of go into this inner balloon that's pretty darn resilient. But just like any other balloon, there are popping points, but they're also all like very stretchy points, but almost just like a water balloon. Like you want to tie off a water balloon that you've overfilled, and you need to let a little water out. It's really hard when something's overfilled to let a little out, including our emotions. So it might look something like me driving home from my office at the end of a day with either the epidemic of barrels that's out there or snow or ice or crazy drivers, and I'm tired and stressed, and by the time I get home I gotta cook dinner, and frankly I don't love to cook. And then my son is like, hey, can you look at this homework thing with me? And maybe my daughter's wanting to tell me every detail about some story because that's how she rolls, and then I'm yelling at them like my emotional balloon is just right, even though they're not doing anything wrong. Or maybe it looks like my kid walking in the house, dropping the backpack right in the middle of the breezeway. And I'm like, hey, can you toss that up on the bench? And they're like, all you ever do is blah, 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 blah. It's their emotional balloon, and them just like often we'll get clues to all of us. This is all of us, the adults, the kids, we're all sort of trying to play this game of how we're holding so much that it might look like us sort of blasting each other with our feelings, even though it's not that somebody's being insubordinate or mean or whatever. It's just that maybe someone needs a few minutes to just empty some of those feelings out, or to have somebody just listen to them for a little bit. So if we can normalize, like this is all of us and we're getting through difficult times together, and then you add 2020 into these normally rather full emotional balloons, it's just becoming so much more than anyone imagined. And if we can have some compassion for that reality and speak to it, it helps to make things better. And when it comes to mental health, making things a little better, giving a little hope, a bit of understanding that you're responding normally to a life situation, that goes so, so far, because we're all human here trying to figure it out. And then again, remembering that everyone's different. Two people can experience the same event, but only one of them ends up troubled about it, right? Like, we can't judge somebody for not being able to get through that thing that, boy, your brother handled that well. Why are you having such a hard time? Because different people go through things differently. And if we can just really accept that and let that be okay, then particularly our kids can feel like, all right, somebody's seeing me for me, which is huge. Again, we just want our kids to be themselves, and when we can validate that, it goes a long way. So when we tie mental health stuff to suicide, right? We look at if somebody's got a diagnosis of these things, the rates of, the likely to die by suicide with a diagnosis, but they're an inverse correlation because sometimes I don't like these numbers, but I show this slide in particular because, well, first of all, we can give diagnosis to all those characters, which when I do trainings can sometimes be fun, but we don't have time for that today. But look at anxiety disorders. We often relate suicide like, oh, they must have been very depressed, which yes, happens. Yes, absolutely. But anxiety disorders, 70% of those who attempt suicide have an anxiety disorder. An anxiety disorder gone untreated for a long period of time gets hopeless deeply hopeless, that I'm never gonna like feel inner calm or inner peace or okay, right? So many times those people who've worked with mental health, and then sometimes as parents, we need to look like anxiety has some major implications. And we know our kids worry, and we know they're high achievers, and we know they're going for everything they can go for. But the fact that they're stressed out so much has major implications, and we need to be checking in on them. We need to be seeing where they're at. Because while some level of anxiety can maybe project us forward and help us to go for things, probably not at the level that's culturally normal now. And how we can address that is by talking about it, right? So these numbers pertain to the lifespan, not just childhood, but they often begin in childhood and adolescence. So we know we see it. What is suicide, right? There's definitely definitions for it: the act of taking one's own life intentionally. We like to stay away from the word commit suicide, particularly those of us who've lost a loved one to suicide. Commit infers a crime or a sin or something, right? And I know parents, particularly who've lost children, have said, like, when they got to just say that they died by suicide, there was this easing of some of the pain around it, because what we know is suicide's related to pain, and not that their loved one did something horribly wrong or that they were wrong. It is the sometimes fatal end of the result of the diseases of depression or anxiety. Not any different than a heart attack or a stroke is the sometimes fatal end result of the diseases of heart disease or diabetes, right? Not everybody dies from a heart attack or a stroke. Some people do. Some people have a lot of indicators that are early, that maybe they've got high blood pressure or their sugars, so they can do some early treatment. Sometimes it's just diet stuff or exercise, or sometimes in the middle there's medication things, and sometimes there's surgeries, right? So there's a spectrum of treatment that can happen to prevent the sometimes fatal end result of that or those diseases. It's the same with mental health. Sometimes there's a lot of people who attempt suicide that don't die by suicide. And there can be a lot of indicators that maybe something's going on. And the earlier the treatment, just like any medical condition, the better off everyone's going to be. But pretty rarely do we see somebody who's showing nothing and they go from 0 to 100 and then the suicide attempt is fatal. We often see warning signs or some indicators if we're looking for them. But because it's not a great predictive science and we can't do a blood draw for it, we often back away from the warning signs or the indicators that might allow us to do earlier intervention. And I can't stress enough how important it is to simply be having this conversation in a casual way with our kids, just like we're supposed to have the conversation with them about substance use and, drinking and the drugs that are out there, and have them prepared for the social world, right? And then we have conversation about sexuality and sex, and hopefully we're having these conversations with them so that we can at least control that conversation, right? And what's being said and accurate information. We should include in that a conversation about suicide, because it's the second leading cause of death for people 10 to 24 years old, up through college, right? And it's likely that they're going to know somebody who's struggling with it, or maybe they're struggling themselves. And what we want them to know is that it's about pain, that we know that it doesn't mean they're crazy, that we know that sometimes when life gets so painful, people think dying is better than living this way. But we can do a whole lot to help reduce the pain, and that doesn't need to be an option. So if you ever think about that, just know that I want to talk about it. If you ever think about suicide, let me know. We're going to do whatever it takes to deal with it, because there's a lot that can be done. overall in the US, it's the 10th leading cause of death. We're somewhere around 48 or 49,000. I know it's going to drop. I still think heart disease is around 670 some thousand, the number 1 and 2, but I think COVID's probably going to be number 3. And so it's going to push everybody else lower, but for this year, but we definitely, it has been increasing in the 30 years that I have been working towards it. Maybe some of it's that the numbers are being, that we're looking at it closely, but we also know that there's a lot of factors in the last 15 years of stress that have increased it overall. And we have to be willing to talk about it in order to address it well. I'll say this real quick. Sometimes this can help us sort of frame it well. I was in a film called Death is Not the Answer that aired on PBS a couple of years ago. And one of the people in the film with me, and we sat on panels discussing it together, was Dr. John Graydon, who started the depression centers at the University of Michigan. Excuse me. And when he was in med school, so he would tell this story, when he was in med school, Dad was a doctor, I think Mom was a nurse, and he got called home from med school to be informed that his father had cancer. This was probably 60 years ago, 50 years ago, maybe. I don't know how old he is exactly. It's a while ago. But Dad's got cancer and he's dying. And this is the last we'll talk about it. Because 50 or 60 years ago, cancer was highly stigmatized. People didn't talk about it. My mom would say, I'm from Italy, and my mom would say that cancer was like a swear word when she was growing up. It was a word that you just wasn't appropriate for kids to even say. So we look at suicide in a similar fashion, that, you know, now we know there's lots of treatments for cancer, and many people survive things that would have been a foregone conclusion, or we thought a foregone conclusion a few decades ago. But it started to be openly addressed and people started understanding how to get help. Suicide, mental health treatment is shifting in that direction. And the more we're willing to, as parents, have these conversations, the better off we're all going to be. Okay. So because of these things, right, the cultural values and beliefs are out there. It used to even be a crime. The way that different religious, whether it was Judaism, even in the Christian churches, like how they handled funerals if somebody died by suicide, like there was all this old stuff that most of it's no longer actually in place. But boy, the messaging hasn't changed enough that people understand that it's not a crime. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean it's a sin. Some of those things can be really painful, especially if you've got a loved one struggling with these things, because you don't want people to know about it, because you don't want people to think these bad things about them. It's better to get help and reach out and talk about it and let them talk about it so that they can maybe get really good help. Just like if somebody we know has a cancer diagnosis or diabetes or something wrong that needs treatment, we'll start asking friends, do you know anybody who's good? So that the best care potentially is available. We need to shift it enough that we're talking about mental health in that same way, so that our family members, our loved ones, can get the help they need and we don't have to hide. And then they feel like, I don't want to talk about this or tell somebody because there's some reason we're not supposed to be talking about it. That's the message that gets given when we trying to protect them from potentially being judged. I get it. And we do need to push and shift that. We also know that people are typically facing more than one problem. Almost always. Pretty rarely is it one thing. Sometimes we'll just see like the one thing just before a suicide if we hear of a major attempt or whatever. But what we know is that it's usually a combination of things. These are the bigger ones that we'll see that can be helpful to know. At the end of the slideshow, you'll see there's a toolkit that's on my website that's got a whole lot more information about looking at warning signs and risk factors and things like that. But a lack of a sense of purpose in life, not really being connected to something, particularly for a young person, can feel like, why bother, right? especially with really stressful things happening. Hopelessness around that. Feeling as if they are a burden. So this is something that as a parent, sometimes we're so stressed out by our own stuff, and then there's 3 other kids at home that I have to take care of, and this one's needing all this support. And mental health treatment isn't like 1 or 2 visits, it's more than that. And I get we're human too, but watching how we communicate it to the person who's needing help, because sometimes they feel like, well, maybe it would be better if I'm not here, because I see how stressed things are with them having to pay for it or having to spend the time. That's an unfortunate common theme, but we're all stressed. And when we're really worried about our kids, sometimes we don't manage that well. And it implicates things. It's a part of it sometimes. So working with a therapist that can help the adults too go through the tough time, so that they can empty some of what they're carrying, especially when they're worried about a kid who's really struggling with emotional stuff, can be an important part of treatment. You want to find somebody who's including all of that. Sometimes people say, well, I was talking with a person earlier today, okay, but I've always been kind of like high energy and kind of a, going and going and going. How do I know that this isn't something else? And what we mostly look for is, what is somebody sort of normal, particularly our kids. They've always sort of this. Then all of a sudden we see either an increase in erratic behavior or a drastic change in moods. Those are the confusing things about watching an adolescent, but indicators that I might need to ask what's going on instead of just blowing it off like many of us do, like, oh, they're just being teenagers. I have my youngest is now 15. My oldest is 27. I've done this rodeo before, but oh my gosh, like it's like, yes, okay. It can be exhausting, and he's a boy, and it was supposed to be different, and it's not always. So checking in when we're seeing something to make sure that it's not something more that we need to tend to, and talking and using the words suicide, or are you thinking about hurting yourself, things like that. Again, worrying and stressing over everything. We see that so much now. The more we can help normalize it, the better off everyone's going to be. I got to check time here because I don't see the time on my computer. This is a confusing one. I bring it up because this is what we're always hoping for as a person that's getting treatment, or maybe they're going through their tough time, and can be really confusing, and that we need to check in on our loved ones. So the sudden improvement in mood for no apparent reason, like all of a sudden the stressor is still there, but I'm feeling better. Particularly if they've ever talked about suicide before, you may just indicate that they've got a solid plan in place, a how and a when, and they think like, oh, see, by the end of the day Monday, I'm going to be out of pain, so I can be okay now. And so the mood's improved. So just staying engaged in the conversation long enough to make sure that really our loved ones are okay through really difficult times. Because it's not about dying, it's about managing pain. They believe they've tried everything else. Some people have never tried even counseling, which is kind of a bare minimum, or maybe they've tried some medications, and medications can do all kinds of wonky things. Boy, I had a kid in here yesterday, and as soon as they administer the medication, I mean, the mom's like, no, like an hour later, the kid who was happy and go lucky is like this kid who had been in the hospital 2 weeks ago. So mom's really hyper aware, and I've been like asking her to be really engaged, but like an hour after taking the medication, the kid's back to like, I'm feeling bad again. And this is a 10-year-old kid. So getting therapy, getting comprehensive treatment, working with somebody who knows, because we're just trying to start to make things better. We're just trying to understand these things, but we don't need to fix everything. Sometimes it becomes this overwhelming, like, how am I going to make it better? But what we need to do is just work on what's right here, right now, to give a little bit of hope that things will improve. Because once there's a little bit of hope and improvement, the need to die goes away. And once there's a little bit of clarity of mind, reasons to stay alive can be remembered. So both things. I've worked in suicide prevention, postvention, intervention for more than 30 years, and I have not lost anyone to suicide. And what I know is that when we can be there with somebody, we can get them through a tough time. Now, it doesn't mean that people who've died by suicide, that somebody did something wrong. It just means that I know that we can get people through this. Because the downside of this conversation is a lot of people still believe if they really are intent on it, they're just going to do it. Maybe a small percentage, tiny percentage, but more than 95% of the people who have seriously attempted suicide don't even actually go on to die by suicide later in life. So what we know is even if somebody struggled with it a lot, and parents sometimes can have a big relief around that. Like it's not a foregone conclusion that this is going to be forever. Like it can be just a transient state that we just are going through something really hard. And it might be for a while and it might be for a short time. But I'm here to say that it can be something that people get through and get beyond and go on to live normal, happy lives. Let me see. So let me also frame it this way in terms of treatment. So how do we, sometimes the question, how do we know when treatment's appropriate? So if we think about it like if you've got a cold, let's think pre-COVID days when life was more normal and we knew what to do. So somebody had a cough or a cold and they may try whatever method for them helps them get through it, right? So they're starting to feel yucky or maybe achy and maybe they'll do the over-the-counter stuff or maybe they'll do the vitamins and herbal stuff, whatever their thing is, right? To try to feel better. And if it goes on for a long period of time and it's not improved, they may go to a doctor because I'm just exhausted now and I just need to figure out how to get well again. Or if some major symptom shows up, like a really high fever, or certainly, vomiting or something like that, where we can't retain fluids or whatever, then we go and we get professional help. So if we can think about mental health that way, it can help. So if somebody's worrying all the time or sad all the time to the point where it's impacting their life, they can't focus, they're too tired to tend to their schoolwork, work, go see their friends, like it's impacting day-to-day life because being sad is normal for everybody has feelings or, worrying about things is normal. But when it goes on for a long period of time, or we see an increase in symptoms, which looks like self-harm behaviors, impulsive behaviors, increased substance uses, or thoughts or communication about suicide. All of those mean treatments needed, right? Long period of time of not getting well or spike in symptoms, just like in our physical. So then how do we know if somebody's suicidal? Unlike physical symptoms, the only way we can know is simply to ask. I can't do a blood draw to find out if somebody's suicidal. It doesn't work. We could do brain scans to sort of understand implications of mental health and agitation, but we're not actually even in that level finding anything, right? That's sort of a new science, but it's finding something, but it's not finding suicidality. And you need to use the word suicide. That's what's going to help us get beyond that hump. You need to say, have you thought about suicide? Are you thinking about suicide? Are you talking about suicide? And we need to be willing to hear a yes. Or say, are you talking about killing yourselves? That's another way to say it. Some parents, to say the word suicide is so hard that at the very least say talking about killing yourselves, because then we're actually talking about what we're talking about. Um, and be willing to hear a yes, because no, not really is probably a yes. And as much as that's not what we want to be hearing as parents, I'm a professional who's been doing this a long time. And when I had to ask my oldest this 10, 12 years ago when she was in high school, it was awful. I was mad. I didn't do it well, but I did it. And that's the most important part. And we can clean up the mess later about, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been so angry, but I was scared. Asking it is the most important part. And hearing their yes if it's a yes, instead of like, oh, no, not really. Okay, good. I'm so glad you're not having those feelings. I feel like I'm blowing through so much information. I just want you guys to know, like, if you're needing more information beyond this, please know. I know there's question and answers after, but it's a lot of information. So schools can make a large impact, and it's not unusual for parents to be concerned about, what if the school knows this is going on with my kid or in my family or something. And I just want to encourage us to really, again, flipping it into the medical model. So my oldest, who when she was struggling with her suicidality, because she got really behind in school, partly because she went through a bunch of medical stuff. So she had an appendix that ruptured at one point, so lots of hospitalization for that. And she got that through that pretty good. And it was appropriate, like when she returned to school, that the school knew what to do to tend to her so she could like leave classes early and, you know, all of the kind of things that are needed to tend to this medical thing. She'd been in the hospital, right? And then I think that was like the end of sophomore year. At the beginning of junior year, she got 2 strains of mono at the same time. And I would say that was probably almost similar to a mental health thing, where for quite a while there, she was so tired, she was getting behind and she didn't know why, and she was kind of ashamed of it. But it was invisible, right? And then we thought maybe she had like a flu-y thing going on. Then finally, when we get her into the doctor, she had a double strain of mono. The doctor's like, I have never seen anyone this sick from mono. So she was home for a bit. And then her return to school, again, looking more like maybe a mental health return, because it was an invisible thing, but she was actually just as at risk for something, some adverse event, which happened but didn't end badly, thank goodness. But she was in one of her classes and one of her buddies joking around with her, hey, and she whacked her on the belly. And like 3 hours later, she calls me and she's like, Mom, my stomach is still really hurting. And of course, with mono, there's the swollen organs and all those things that we need to be careful of, that we know, but the kids don't know this about each other. You know, so then we're back in the ER tending to her. Mental health, and had the school not known all that had happened to her, they wouldn't have known the appropriate response to what had been going on, because it's like, really, that was nothing. But the school knew what she had been through. And so then they could respond appropriately. And then, of course, I could respond appropriately. When we allow the schools, the appropriate people in the schools, to know our kid's been through something, this happened, they're struggling, they're getting help, it's all okay, then they on their end can sort of, I always say invisibly, when I'm talking to parents, invisibly put their arms around our kids. You know, so the kids aren't feeling like, well, is everybody checking up on me? Because no kid wants that. But it's an important asset. It's valuable. And that's where the kids generally are if there's not a pandemic happening in our world, right? And in terms of the schools, what we know is the research will show us that when other adults besides the parents are involved in kids' lives, and that they feel like they've got a good connection with 1 or 2 or 3 other adults, so whether it's people in schools or, you know, friends of the parents or whatever, that are good, healthy adults, outcomes for difficult times are so much better, right? And the Marine Corps did a study a number of years ago that talked about And it was a simple thing. And I think it's important for schools and parents to kind of know this about our kids' friends, that by simply using the name of somebody so that they can dispute this whole thing that nobody even sees me, nobody even knows I'm alive. So that kids walking down the hall, and if you're active in school and you know these kids' names, to simply say, hey, Joe, how you doing? Even they're hanging their head and they don't respond. But undisputed, somebody saw me and knew me and said my name. That's a protective factor. It's something small and easy that can be done so that this idea that I'm so alone in all of this emotional stuff can be reduced, and it can help. What we know is the most promising psychosocial interventions for suicidal youth have a family component, which is why, again, finding, if you're working with a clinician, finding one that encompasses the whole family, because so much of this hasn't been readily talked about, so that coaching is given so the family knows what to do. In fact, the toolkit that you'll see at the end was in response to most of the time when I worked for a crisis center, families calling saying the kid's been discharged or the school says this, but I have know what to do. All they said was watch the kid, which is not enough information. But when families can be actively involved, we know that outcomes improve significantly for the youth. This is what the toolkit looks like. A version of it is on my website. It's really simple reading, because what we know is that when your kid's in crisis, you're in crisis, and thinking clearly about stuff reduces significantly. So we tried to make it as simple as possible so that families who are in need of help and who are worried about their kid going through an emotional crisis have a chunk of resources in one place that's safe for the kids to look at. Because some of the toolkits I've seen out there sometimes become prescriptive, like, oh, the kids do it this way and this time and this, and that's not good information for our kids to have. This is information that, like, here's a bunch of stuff that can help the parents and the kids. So it's available to you. It's money that we got funded from SAMHSA. Anybody can use it. Anybody can print it. It's just information that can help. There's safety planning in there. This is a great intervention that the schools can use. Again, there's some templates on the website, on my website, and how to create a safety plan. So when you're in an emotional crisis, that it doesn't have to go through and become something that's not safe, or substance use or whatever. It's a behavior modification tool modeled after it's a best practices. This is a little bit modified in plainer, easier, kid friendly language from the Brown and Stanley version, which is still a really good version, but this is a little bit modified from that. For people who are familiar with DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, some of them called Now Matters Now, nowmattersnow.org, are coming up with so we know what to do. All our kids have been taught, what do you do if the building's on fire, and everybody does these fire drills, and what do you do if you're on fire, right? Stop, drop, and roll. So they were looking at, what if you're emotionally on fire? What can you do? And these are 3 good things that I was just going over this with a young woman today she's a high school senior, and she'd been having panic attacks. And she was just describing, like, the visceral feelings, and she didn't know how to stop them. It took an hour for her to calm down, and she was just so distressed. So if you're emotionally on fire, there's 3 things we can do. And the team Now Matters Now was trying to figure out good words to help us remember, like sort of stop, drop, and roll. But this is what Ellen and I have come up with for their model, which is great. So chill, be still, and look. So chill being, so we as humans have what's referred to as the mammalian diving reflex. So Ellen will say, my partner will say, like, stick your face in a bucket of ice when we're doing training. But what it is that as mammals, when we dive into ice cold water, so there's ice cold here-ish, and we're holding our breath, our body relaxes. I don't like the cold. I don't necessarily feel relaxed when I'm cold, but taking an ice cold shower and holding your breath, if you're so anxious that you can't calm down, or everything's, people get that way, doing these things can help us calm, right? So chill, be still, and look. The idea is this was a suicide prevention tool as well. So the be still is, don't make any decisions. Don't do anything. Don't do anything impulsive. Don't get in the car and drive away. Just be still. So chill, be still, and look. And the look is, look somebody in the eye. If nothing else, look your pet in the eye, but ideally looking another human in the eye, even if it's like a FaceTime or some sort of a device, that's okay. But it's also really hard to do something harmful to yourself when you've looked at somebody that you know, or some loved fur animal that you know, or whatever. Those things can be great in the moment, in a heightened moment of distress. What can you do to help somebody who's really freaking out? That's a tool too. The schools have resources. You guys have resources in your school that they're going to talk about, that Cherie and Julia? No.
Nicole.
Uh,
Cherie and Nicole. Yeah,
and Nicole, thank you. Sorry about that. I'm not seeing all the names here.
that's okay.
Are going to go over, but this is just basic information. If you can walk away with two things: that feelings are normal. We all got them. In our maturity, we're trying to not express them, but I don't know that that's a good thing, since stress is the #1 killer, and stress is nothing other than unexpressed feelings, right? That causes lots of physical problems for us. Feelings are normal, and ask about suicide, and make it absolutely okay for any of your loved ones to come to you and tell you that they're suicidal. Okay, thank you.
Gigi, thank you so very much. I've taken notes, and I have to say I've certainly come away with a lot of hope as to how we can help ourselves and our children. I'd like to reach out to, and so thank you so much for your time. I'd like to reach out to both Nicole and Cherie, who are going to talk a little bit about what we have, some of their perspectives, and then we'll do a little Q&A. Nicole and Cherie, are you?
Yeah, I'll start.
Thank you, Cherie.
Hi, I'm Cherie Wilson. I am the Crisis and Wellness Counselor at Seaholm. And Nicole and I are going to kind of go back and forth on a few things about Seaholm and school counselors. So, what our role is and what we have going on at Seaholm. School counselors are all trained to recognize mental health warning signs, including changes in school performance or attendance, mood changes, disciplinary problems, or problems at home like divorce. We are also all trained in suicide intervention. In addition, the counselors receive referrals from staff, parents, students. We help students with things like time management, organization when needed. We provide short-term counseling, crisis intervention, focus on mental health or situational concerns such as grief, difficult transitions. We provide referrals to school and community resources that treat mental health issues with the intent of removing barriers to learning and helping students return to maybe a better version of themselves into the classroom. When we have a student who's struggling severely or in treatment for a mental health issue, all of the counselors can work collaboratively, I never can say that, with the outside therapist or hospital to make the transition back to school a better one for the student. All of us counselors work with parents, teachers, students to support any student who's dealing with a mental health issue. And really, we have conversations with the parent. And if, we really do appreciate if a parent comes to us, and we can provide as much or as little detail to teachers as a parent is comfortable with, but it really does help, I think, to have a counselor there to kind of collaborate with you and work, with your student and the teachers. Nicole?
So for those of you that don't know me, my
Shelter?
name's Nicole Festian. I'm one of the counselors, obviously, at Seaholm. And so Cherie talked a little bit, obviously, about what our role is and just like in general, a lot of what we do. And I kind of, moving forward, want to get into what has Seaholm done? You know, how do we normalize the topic of mental health or suicide awareness so it's out in the open, we reduce the stigma, and we, you know, try to, you know, quote unquote, get it on the radar so people are aware, people understand that it's acceptable to talk about, things along those lines. So one really important thing that we do is small support groups. A lot of times we gauge them by the need of the student body. So in the past, we've, you know, sent out Google surveys or like Survey Monkeys and said, hey, this is like the 10 topics that we're gonna consider for a group. And we'll base the need based on what the students say they're needing. We also do it for staff referrals as well. So some of those groups that we've co-facilitated, Cherie and I are the leads for groups, so we usually facilitate together. Almost every single year we have a grief group, which is sad and unfortunate, but it's very much needed. And so I think grief, and I think as all of us as adults have probably more than likely experienced it, you know that it can hit you at different points in time, and it can be a prolonged process. You know, just because you lose someone, you know, a few years ago, it doesn't mean that you're still not thinking about it, especially if that was a very impactful person in your life, like a parent or a sibling or a best friend. So we run a grief support group every year. We've run support groups for building self-esteem, and for boys as well as girls students. We've run groups for substance abuse recovery. And our most recent group has been on anxiety. So Cherie and I are running a weekly group right now for anxiety, and it's, you know, addressing how to cope with anxiety. So some of the things that we've done in that support group have been like guided imagery or a grounding technique, which is the idea of how do I, you know, reduce the idea of catastrophizing my thoughts and getting to a point where I'm spiraling, you know, to a point where I can calm down a little bit and start rationally thinking again. We've also implemented parts of the Trails curriculum, which some of you, or probably most of you, might not be familiar with, but it's a well-known curriculum plan in our field that comes from the U of M Depression Center, and it's specific to depression and anxiety. So that's one major thing that we do. And Cherie's going to talk about some of the clubs that we sponsor together.
Yeah, we sponsor a couple of student clubs. The first club is called Here for You, and that works in collaboration with the grant through Oakland County. The project trains teams of high school peer educators to develop a year-long building campaign with the goals of first increasing awareness about the signs and symptoms of depression, anxiety, and then working to diminish the stigma around depression, anxiety, and help seeking behaviors, and that's key. And third and last is to connect peers with trusted adults and mental health supports in the community. Last year's group of students launched campaigns to raise awareness through Instagram. They did some like posters up around the building, and we had a really fun little hot chocolate event, 1X Block. They also played an active role in You Matter Week, but as you know, the year didn't quite end as we planned, so we didn't quite get to do everything. And we're still waiting on Oakland schools this year. I just was in communication, so I'm hoping we get things up and running for that particular club really soon, because it's been a while, but I think there's some issues with the way the grant works. And then Nicole, you're going to talk about Hope and Healing.
Yep. So another club that we co-sponsor together is the Hope and Healing Club, which was initiated originally by 2 of our senior students, and it's grown since then, obviously, which is what we like to see with our student-led groups. But the whole idea of the group is to build mental health awareness and bring it to light and have an open and safe space to be able to talk about that. And so we've done a lot of initiatives throughout the school and throughout the community through that club. For example, they've hung posters throughout the building for different like mental health diagnostic information and statistics to just bring awareness to the students and staff in the building. We did a Love Has No Labels campaign, which promoted LGBTQ awareness, which a lot of people are aware that that specific population has increased mental health as well as suicide rates. And we've done ribbon campaigns to bring awareness for suicide and mental health, written positive affirmations on the Maple Lane walls, did things in the memory of people that possibly someone had lost due to mental health or suicide. And the biggest thing that we're doing right now that's coming up in November that the kids are promoting to the students as well as the families is International Survivors of Suicide Day is on November 21st. So it's coming up, and they are campaigning for a 5K race to raise awareness. And what's nice is all the money that is contributed to that 5K goes to the National Mental Health Alliance. And so it's going to a good cause. It's going to something in the field that they're very passionate about. So it's definitely a club that we like in the building, and brings a ton of awareness to our student body as well as our staff and community.
Yeah, we were just talking about in that club what to do for students when we come back and how to do some kind of welcoming in the halls. So if you have any ideas, let us know. Another thing I just wanted to mention is something called You Matter Week, and I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but we started a few years ago in a partnership with the Friendship Circle, and it's really just a great event that we have every year, usually in January or February. It's just a week-long campaign, although we're working hard to spread that throughout the year. And we did a few things last year, right, Kyle? Like we did a pancake breakfast in the You Matter spirit. It's really just spreading the message that the individual matters while trying to reduce that, the stigma around mental health. And we do that through teacher and student TED Talks. So the speakers talk about a challenge they faced and how they overcame that and came through it. It really allows students to see a different side to their teachers and their peers and understand that, like, look, everybody, we all face challenges, and you can get through it. And then there's other things involved. Like last year we had another speaker on mental health. We have hall decorations every year. And then a big part of that is Safe Talk training, which is a suicide awareness training that Nicole runs, and that's open to students during that week and sometimes at other parts of the year. And Nicole, you can explain Safe Talk.
Yeah, so some of you might be familiar with Safe Talk training because I know that some of you attended the parent community Safe Talk training last year, which is great. And we're planning on doing those again this year. We don't have a specific date in mind, but I know that our goal is to have 100% of our staff trained. Right now, we're at about 70 to 75% of our staff trained. We've done probably 6 or 7 student led trainings, and then 2 to 3 parent trainings. And so the more people that we can get trained within our community, the better, because the training is identifying signs and symptoms that are related to suicide, normalizing the communication like Gigi mentioned in her presentation, and it's by far extremely important, is having that open and direct communication, about suicide, being able to use that terminology and not kind of scooting around it. And that training helps people to understand that concept and be able to bridge the person that may be struggling to someone that, you know, would be able to help them further. There's also other trainings after Safe Talk training that we haven't provided, but like, for example, there's an assist training that goes into more in-depth suicide intervention training. And so that might be something that we pursue in the future, for especially for staff being able to know those intervention skills. But I think that it's a really great asset that we have brought to the Seaholm community, and I think it's very much needed. The more people that can recognize the signs and feel comfortable talking about it, the better.
And Nicole, don't we have 70% of staff trained right now?
Yep, 70 to 75%. I think it's like 72 to be exact, but a majority of our staff, which is great.
Yeah, so yeah, Safe Talk's been great. I know we had a goal with Kyle of having 100% of staff trained. We had a training planned for the spring. Well, that didn't happen, but we're still going to work towards that goal. And just to kind of wrap up, like we do a lot of other things. We we'll do classroom presentations. I just did one a couple weeks ago, and let me just say, thank God the teacher was working the Zoom in the breakout rooms, because I did not know how to do it. But we talked in that group about anxiety and a few strategies. We're trying to improve like our community presence, and I worked with social workers, psychologists, other counselors at the district level, and we have a district wellness page all ready to go. I'm not sure why it's not up, but it should be up any day, and we'll have a link to that in our counselor page, and I'm sure there'll be something put out, but look for that. And then, in the e-news, I've mentioned a couple of things. I try to write a little something, but I'm also doing a little podcast with the wellness counselor at Grove, so also out of my comfort zone, but it's not that bad. And we talk about things like anxiety and Zoom fatigue and self-care and stuff like that. So you can check that out. And that's your summary of what's going on at Seaholm right now.
Well, I have something else too, but
Okay.
like just expanding on that community presence. We also, I think a lot of, especially our students, can relate to social media. And so we've expanded our counseling presence to social media. Specifically, we created an Instagram account that's solely focused to social emotional learning. And so a really big following on that, which is great to see. And hopefully it grows even more than that. But we have all types of stuff on there, whether it be like mental health, stats and awareness, different coping strategies and skills that they can use. We bring awareness weeks to light, such as, dating violence, or substance abuse awareness month is October. So we just posted something about that, or mental health awareness week, things like that. And it's just a really great tool that we've found to help the students feel valued, help them feel like if they are struggling with that, or they know someone within their family or friends that are struggling with that, that it's normal, that, they're not alone, and that we can openly talk about it. So that's kind of what we do a lot with the social emotional learning piece. And then obviously, I think some of you have attended, but not specific to counseling, but Seaholm in general, as well as the district, have offered some really great presentations or speakers and stuff that focus on mental health, which I always think is really great. Obviously, we haven't had the opportunity with what's going on with COVID right now, but, for example, last year we had a speaker come in regards to depression, and they did a really great play, which was kind of surprising, because I was thinking, how do you make a great play about depression and it not be kind of sad or kind of a downer? But the guy did a phenomenal job, and it really helped to normalize depression and kind of more importantly, what that person did or what that boy did to get through his struggle with depression. Or we've also done like the ANK screening throughout the district that brought to light anxiety and things like that. So the more that we can implement like that within Seaholm as well as within our district, obviously the better.
Well, thank you, Nicole and Cherie. Thank you so much for outlining some of the incredible work and all the different resources that are available. As we heard Gigi talk, it is important to be able to be honest and open about the need for assistance and to be able to find those kinds of resources. And I don't even think I knew of all the numbers of different resources that are available, and I think many of us don't know. And I think that's important to know that you can reach out to any one of the three of you, and that the schools take a huge function in this. We don't have any questions in the chat, but I had a couple questions that I might ask if I could. One is, I think if I'm correct, out on the Seaholm website is in the counseling section. Cherie and Nicole, people can find a series of references to these different programs. Students and parents can. They're listed out on the counseling site. Would that be the right resource for them to go to?
I take this one. So, if I'm answering honestly, I would say yes and no. I definitely think that the Seaholm Counseling website could be is a work in progress. I think that it could have more things on it, and we're aware of that, and we've been working on that. And that's kind of it. What happens is some gets posted on Instagram, some gets posted on the e-news, some gets posted on the website. And so it's not that we're not putting the information out there. It's just we really need to work on where can where can a parent or community member go that's like a one-stop shop for this type of information. And so that's we're really looking at the district website that Cherie mentioned. That's going to be a really great tool for coping strategies and for resources and stuff.
Okay, thank you. Gigi, we do have a question. Is the toolkit that you mentioned available online? And I believe you said it was?
Yep. So my website is iforhope.com, iforhope.com. And if you go to the resources page, it's on there, a template for the safety plan for schools and families to fill out, and other resources. But the toolkit actually has a sort of like a colorful thing. So, but there's a lot of resources on there. But yeah, it's available.
So maybe I'll make an obligation to put that out on the PTA website, and Nicole and Tree maybe check in with you on a few of the key ones so that parents can have that as a location to make links to. So thank you. I was also, Gigi, in your presentation, there was a reference to a social emotional learning curriculum, and I was interested to know what that was.
Well, lots of the things that, the groups and things that are happening, I don't know how you all do them in your school. Sometimes they're embedded during the day, which is can be ideal, but if there's a curriculum that includes, essays about things that are relevant, that are about feelings, those are like social, emotional, like how do we weave those stories into curriculum? I just had a young man, so cute, his parents were, so I've encouraged him, like, if you're gonna, he's young and he talked about suicide. His parents brought him to me and I said, look, if there's an adult that you trust, it's okay to talk about it. And the teacher had the kids write a little essay about something, and he wrote about the fact that he had thoughts about suicide, and the teacher, thank goodness, had her own personal, like one of her own kids had struggled with stuff. So she wasn't at all shocked, but the family was very surprised how open he was. But when it's embedded sort of in a curriculum, like something that you went through that was really hard, like all of those pieces, that's social emotional, as well as what Cherie and Nicole talked about, that's social emotional curriculum too. So
got it. Thank you.
All those things. Yeah.
We have a question is, if your child is over 18, how can parents help if the child does not want a parent's help? The doctors and hospitals cannot give out information. What can parents do to help with a suicidal child or kid that's over 18?
Yeah. So if there's a concern for imminent risk, you can get authorities involved, for sure. Um, and they will, and I have worked with the Birmingham police in the past for adults that were way over 18 that were willing to do what was necessary to make sure that somebody was that was in so much pain that they couldn't see that they really needed help, got the help that they need. That's not an easy thing to do for your loved one, but if it's a matter of life and death, absolutely. Um, but sometimes I had a situation a couple of years ago where I was talking with a family, and the young man was 18 and he was a track star, and they were driving him to the hospital. And dad was literally in the back seat holding him so he didn't jump out of the car because they knew that if he got out, like there was nobody going to catch him. And they pulled into the hospital. This happened to be, they ended up going out to U of M. And the security guard was like this angel that walked up next to the car, and he knew that possibly he was going to have to hang on to this kid, um, because the kid was impulsive and scary and suicidal, and the guy just talked him through it and said, hey, we're here, we want to help. So oftentimes we can find a way when you're working with a professional that's comfortable with it, and if it's imminent risk, we can get them care. Other than that, it's situational. So it would be one of those things like talking with either the school counselors or somebody like me to see how we can work with a young person who's afraid to go to counseling or whatever is keeping them out of getting the help that they need. But if it's imminent risk, again, like if we're talking about life and death, absolutely, there's things we can do.
I know sometimes in a school environment, and Gigi might see it in an outside therapist environment as well, but sometimes the students, even though it's really important to talk to the parents or their guardian, they're not the most comfortable to go to them first. And so sometimes if it's brought to our attention, whether the student is 18 or younger, like just being there and listening and asking that person, like, who is someone you trust? Or is there someone that you feel comfortable talking about this with? Like, can I bring them down and just for like support? I mean, I know that it doesn't happen often, but I have had a few suicide assessments in my office where the kid's best friend is sitting next to them just to comfort them, to make them feel comfortable as they're talking about it. And then they get to a point where they say, okay, like I'm more comfortable now where maybe I can talk to my parent about this and I need to talk to my parent, because naturally we're going to call a parent. We can't just hear something like that and disregard it. But sometimes they just need someone that other than a parent that they're trusting to speak about it first.
Right. And if a staff member is gifted with some information like that somebody's thinking about suicide and they're not the most comfortable with the conversation, or they're afraid of like saying the wrong thing, that warm kind of a handoff from an adult can happen too. Like, I'm going to sit there with, Miss Wilson or Miss Question, you and I'm not going to just leave you there. We're going to sit and we're going to talk it through. And then maybe everybody together can say like, look, we need to get you help, because like if you were dying of cancer, we would make sure that you got all the help you need, that you could get through that. And way more kids struggle with this than they do with cancer, and we're going to be right here next to you getting the help you need.
Thank you. There was also a question, have rates of suicide gone up with COVID? And in particular with our kids specifically, and or just some of the more, that's the question, is have we seen some increases, and what do parents need to do to kind of respond to the circumstances?
So the interesting thing about mental health is that, so what we know is we're definitely seeing data on things like overdoses have exponentiate some of those, maybe, or suicide. Mental health is so underfunded that we don't get real-time data on it like you do with substance use, which is very frustrating. So usually the data we're looking at is a good 18 months behind. So anecdotally, we're seeing way more stress I don't know that I have yet heard of, usually, because generally when completions are happening, so many different people in the community are reaching out to me, because I've been doing this for so long. So I have not had the experience yet. I did a few months ago, but I had wondered when the school year started how it would go, of an increase of reports to me about that personally. Um, I think that we're going to see, likely, but I also think that what we've learned about, and sort of what I've been communicating with parents about, is that what happened in the beginning that was so painful for kids is that they couldn't see anybody. And right now, what we know is that even if we're not in school, there's safe ways that kids can gather together, because it is really important that they have time. So balancing those emotions in a safe way in terms of COVID, so that it's not so black and white like it was in the springtime. That was really painful for a lot. And I know, like, right when school started, some of them, had plans to go back in a hybrid version and then shut those down. And then now we're back to them. But boy, that first week before school for some kids, that felt really hopeless, especially ones who were not thriving with this whole Zoom kind of way. So again, shifting, but when there's communication, like, okay, now we just have to work harder to figure out how to give them that piece of connection to their peers in a safe way with the pandemic still happening. So that's what's different now than was different in the spring.
Can I add just that we did survey our students just a couple weeks ago. And that was one of the questions we asked, was how are you connecting? Because we did ask if they felt disconnected, or how connected did they feel to Seaholm, and it was very disconnected. But then we asked, well, how are you connecting with your peers and with a support group? And we listed several things, but they did say athletics. So I think the fact that athletics were allowed to go on, and this goes again back to, I think, that original comment about what's going on with our students now that we have COVID and we're not in school. And I think that is I think it's a significant problem, but they are finding ways. And so thank goodness they did have athletics. They do have music was another one that, last night we had the band perform out in the, on the ground on Maple Field. And we were saying how for the first time it felt like fall because the band was playing. And we had missed that, from games and that kind of thing. So these are good ways that they can have that support system. But obviously, we want them back at school, because school is a way for them to connect to one another and to us, and we have all these things that we want to provide for them, and it's just harder to do. It's harder to connect. And when I talk to the teachers about how they're doing in those Zoom classes, well, if you look at your screen right now, we see some people, we don't see everybody. They're in a small box, and so this is what's happening in the classroom too, and it's just more difficult. So we are looking forward to coming back together, and we are seeking ways to allow that kind of connection, like the senior parade that we had and senior sunrises. And we've got some goodies that we're trying to get to each class. We are particularly worried about the freshman class, who has not yet had a chance to be, in our building, to truly feel settled in, and how that must feel. So we definitely are cognizant of that and recognize that it definitely impacts their, their emotional state.
Thank you. I don't think we have any new questions. I think there was an opportunity, a suggestion that we can certainly share this with our Birmingham BPS Board of Education, as I think they certainly recognize the focus on mental health and our kids and the risks to our children on back to school. And so I think there's always an opportunity to, as we all know, there's a lot of stress. And as Kyle said, school's doing so many things to try to allow the students to have an opportunity to connect and to find that connection. So I don't think we have any other questions. I just want to thank everyone for attending. Important conversations. Well, we will have this out on our website, and people can view it later, because I think there's a lot of good information that sometimes you need to go back and listen to and take a soak on about the resources and the solutions. I think, Gigi, what I came away with is we have to be able to talk about this. And Nicole and Sheree, we have to be able to be open and be direct about, what is one thinking of doing, and take away the stigma that's related, and be open about, as you say, it's the need to be able to talk about it, to de-escalate. And I like the stop, drop, and roll, or the chill, be still and look, as some really good ideas about how we as adults certainly have those moments, and certainly our children do as well, and I'm sure our teachers do as well. I can't imagine the stress our teachers have with all of this too. So what I think is being kind to ourselves, and being kind to each other and those around us, and understanding that we don't always know what any individual has going on, and so sometimes we have to ask. So thank you very, very much for this important conversation, and for everyone's time tonight. And Kyle, thank you, and all the teachers at Seaholm for everything you do for our students. We appreciate it. It's a hard time for everybody, and everyone's doing their very best to be there for each other. So thank you, everyone.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Julia.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.